Right now, at this very moment, you are sitting on a planet that is spinning at over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. You do not feel it because everything around you, the atmosphere, the buildings, the ground beneath your feet, the coffee in your cup, is all spinning at exactly the same speed. You are moving at the speed of a bullet and you feel absolutely nothing. But what if, for just 5 seconds, the Earth suddenly, completely stopped spinning? And then started again? What would those 5 seconds look like? Let me walk you through it, because it would be the most violent, the most destructive, and the most terrifyingly brief apocalypse imaginable. The ground beneath your feet comes to an instant halt, but you, and everything else not welded into the planet's bedrock, do not. Newton's first law of motion, the law of inertia, tells us that an object in motion remains in motion unless acted upon by an external force. The Earth stopping is not an external force acting on you. It is the removal of the surface that was carrying you along. You would be launched sideways, toward the east, at whatever rotational velocity your latitude dictates. At the equator, that is over 1,037 miles per hour. At mid-latitudes like New York or London, it is still over 700 miles per hour. At the poles, where rotational velocity approaches zero, the effect would be minimal. Everything not anchored to bedrock becomes a projectile in the first fraction of a second. People, vehicles, buildings, animals, trees, topsoil, sand, water, furniture, and every loose object on the surface of the Earth would be hurled eastward at hundreds to over 1,000 miles per hour. The result would be equivalent to the largest asteroid impact in Earth's history, but happening everywhere on the planet simultaneously. In the first second, every city on or near the equator would cease to exist in any recognizable form. Not damaged, not flattened, shredded. Every structure, every vehicle, every person would be launched eastward at supersonic speeds, tumbling and disintegrating on contact with anything solid. The friction and impacts would generate temperatures high enough to ignite fires spontaneously across continental-scale areas. The atmosphere, which is also rotating with the Earth, would not stop either. From the perspective of the now stationary ground, the air would become a global wind, traveling at over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. This is not a hurricane. This is not a tornado. This is the entire atmosphere of the planet, all 5 quadrillion tons of it, moving as a single unstoppable mass at hypersonic speed. The wind alone would strip the surface of the Earth clean of everything: soil, vegetation, buildings, down to bare rock. And then there are the oceans. The water in the oceans is also rotating with the Earth, carrying enormous momentum. When the ground stops, the water keeps moving. The result would not be a tsunami in any conventional sense. It would be the entire ocean sloshing eastward as a single body at hundreds of miles per hour. Massive walls of water, potentially kilometers high near coastlines, would surge across continents at supersonic speeds, scouring everything in their path down to bedrock before draining back. Coastal and low-lying regions across the entire planet would be submerged, scoured, and sterilized in seconds. And there is another consequence that operates on a slightly longer timescale but is equally dramatic. The Earth is not a perfect sphere. Because of its rotation, it bulges outward at the equator. The equatorial diameter is approximately 26 miles greater than the polar diameter. This equatorial bulge exists because the centrifugal effect of rotation pushes mass outward at the equator. If the rotation stopped, even briefly, the centrifugal force maintaining that bulge would vanish. Over time, gravity would work to reshape the planet into a more perfect sphere. And the most immediate manifestation of this would be in the oceans. The water currently held at the equatorial bulge by centrifugal effect would be released and would flow, under the influence of gravity alone, toward the poles. The equatorial oceans would drain northward and southward, and the polar regions would flood catastrophically. A massive supercontinent would emerge around the equator as sea levels dropped by miles in tropical regions, while the Arctic and Antarctic would be submerged under enormously deep new oceans. The geography of the entire planet would be unrecognizable. But we said only 5 seconds. So what happens when the Earth starts spinning again? The restart would be every bit as devastating as the initial stop. Everything that somehow survived the first halt Any structure, any body of water, any mass of air that had come to rest relative to the now stationary surface would suddenly find the ground accelerating beneath it back to full rotational speed. The effect would be identical to the initial stop, but in the opposite direction. Everything would be launched westward at hundreds to over 1,000 miles per hour. The atmosphere, briefly calmed, would again become a supersonic global wind, this time blowing west. The oceans, having partially settled, would be set into violent motion again in the opposite direction. And let us not forget the planet's magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field is generated by the rotation of its liquid iron outer core, a process called the geodynamo. The outer core is spinning along with the rest of the planet, and if the solid Earth stopped while the liquid core continued moving due to its own momentum, the resulting shear forces would be extraordinarily complex. A 5-second interruption might not permanently destroy the magnetic field, but any weakening or disruption would allow increased solar radiation and charged particles from the solar wind to reach the surface, compounding the already apocalyptic conditions. Without the full strength of the magnetic field, the solar wind would begin the slow process of stripping away our atmosphere, exactly as it did to Mars over billions of years when Mars lost its own magnetic field. 5 seconds. 300 million milliseconds. That is genuinely all it would take to transform our planet from a thriving biosphere supporting 8 billion people into an unrecognizable, sterilized wasteland of bare rock, hypersonic winds, and displaced oceans. The rotation of the Earth is so fundamental, so constant, so seemingly permanent that no one ever thinks about it. But everything you know and depend on, the length of your day, the shape of the continents, the patterns of ocean currents, the existence of a breathable atmosphere, the stability of the magnetic shield protecting you from cosmic radiation. All of it depends on a ball of rock and iron that never, ever stops turning. If 5 seconds of your attention was worth this journey, imagine what subscribing could do. Hit that button, and we will keep exploring the invisible